Hello, friends. We are excited that our No Small Endeavor Plus community is growing. Now, all of our friends in the No Small Endeavor orbit are intelligent, smarter than average, winsome, good-looking, while the members of NSC Plus seem especially so because they are enjoying ad-free episodes as well as special subscriber-only content once a month where we discuss habits and practices learned from our guests over the years. And those special episodes have been a lot of fun, personal and practical. I love sitting down with our producer, Jacob Lewis, and recording those for you. And so we would love to have you join us. And your NSC Plus membership helps support the show. So because of all of these things, we'd love for you to join the NSC Plus family. Just go to nosmallendeavor.com, click subscribe, and start catching up on our subscriber-only episodes today. Again, go now, nosmallendeavor.com, click subscribe, and start catching up. See you there. Hello, friends. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. I'm Lee C. Camp. This is our unabridged interview with Angela Williams Gorrell, author of The Gravity of Joy. Beautiful interview with Angela, who had recently published her book, The Gravity of Joy, in which she tells the story of experiencing 3 deaths in her family in various tragic ways over a 4-week period, all while she was researching joy and starting a new job at Yale, teaching a class on a life worth living. And it's a remarkable sort of testimony to the way in which any sort of consideration of a good life must hold together things that seem oxymoronic or paradoxical, namely the reality of the difficulties of life and simultaneously the pursuit of joy, or as I tell my students, rightfully defined happiness. Wonderful interview. Hope you enjoy. This was also released in a produced version along with commentary from Miroslav Volf. Both Angela and Miroslav exposit this for us, that life can be excruciatingly hard and simultaneously joyful. And in that vein, a warning that this episode contains mention of suicide, addiction, and death. Angela Williams Gorrell is Assistant Professor of Practical Theology at Baylor University's George W. Pruitt Theological Seminary, ordained pastor in the Mennonite Church, USA. And today we're talking about her new book, The Gravity of Joy, a story of being lost and found. Welcome, Angela.
I'm so honored to be here and to be talking with you today. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a delight to have you here on this cold winter day and here in Nashville. Glad to have you here in Nashville on your way.
Yes, it's so
talking
great.
to various audiences here in the Southeast. So glad that we could meet here. Your book is seeking, as you say, to consider joy as a counteragent to America's crisis of despair, which is a lovely line. But I'm going to flash forward just a second, not to talk about it yet, but we will later. And yet at the end of the book, or in one of the last chapters, you say, but we can't make joy like spaghetti. There's not a recipe for it, right? And so you're clearly not doing self-help technique in the book. And yet you frame the sort of difficulty of this book's agenda by talking about how you were studying joy, teaching a course at Yale on joy, when the so-called crisis of despair crashed into your own life. Tell us a little bit about what some of the stories you share in the book about how this crisis begins to crash into your own life.
Yeah. It was 8 months into working. I was working on the Theology of Joy and the Good Life Project at Yale. And teaching a class called Life Worth Living, or I was about to. I hadn't taught it yet. Of course, in the first few months that I was there, I just was over the moon about what I was doing. I read as much as possible about joy. I took notes daily on it. And I just thought, does it get any better than this?
Yeah.
Like working on this team at Yale University, I don't know that it does. Like I felt very, very grateful. 8 months into working on the project, one of my family members died by suicide. And that day changed my life forever in a moment. And that, people talk about that a lot, how 1 minute of your life can change everything. It changed the way I saw my life, the way I related to other people. It changed my faith in dramatic ways. And that whole week, I happened to be Dustin's family's kind of like one of their people. I think as a pastor, you're kind of called upon by your family in the midst of crisis in a way that, it makes sense to everybody. And so just helping to do the funeral, present for a lot of very, very painful moments that I don't even write about in the book. And got back to Connecticut a week and a half later and just thought, I don't know how we're going to recover from this as a family. This is going to be a very difficult, road to healing for us. And then a week and a half later-ish, get a text from my sister, you need to call me. I call her and my little sister and find out that my nephew, Mason, had died at 22 very suddenly of a previously unknown health condition, a heart condition that he had. Called my oldest sister, who is his mother, and just decided, I'm like, Steph, do you want me to come? Yes, will you come? And so I find myself just a couple weeks after Dustin's, funeral, headed to Albuquerque, New Mexico for another funeral. And got back to Connecticut on a Sunday night the day after Mason's funeral. And I just thought, I read his obituary at his funeral, spoke at Dustin's funeral, just my heart, I did not think I could be any sadder. It was just I don't know, again, how am I going to recover from this? Oh my goodness. This has been the worst 3 weeks of my life, 2 days later, after I get back, get a message that my dad is in the ER fighting for his life. I just saw, I can't even comprehend it at that time. And I just think there is no way that my dad is dying this week. This cannot happen to me. This cannot happen to all of us. Steph just lost her son. We cannot lose our dad right now, And
I think you said you were teaching a class and you just had to decide to go ahead and teach the class.
So this was Tuesday night and my first day of teaching at Yale, because in the fall, we didn't teach because we were getting oriented to our research for the project. So it was my first day teaching at Yale University. I just got my PhD 6 months before. I'm trying to hold myself to, I'm teaching a brand new class that I've never taught before too, and then it's called Life Worth Living. And so, I just do whatever people do, I think, when they are in the mode of survival. Right. I was just in survival mode. And I just went to that, and I went to some other namaste place in my head. I don't know what I did. And I went into there and I just did my thing because I just kept that part of I just kept my heart almost closed, to what was happening.
Yeah.
And then I just casually mentioned to my students, if I can't be in class, the next class, it's because my dad's not doing very well. He's in the ER and, he's really sick. He's dying. But I didn't say that, And then the next morning, I just realized my sister and I were going back and forth, and she called the nurse, and she has a degree. She's an occupational therapist, but she's done nursing school too. So she called the nurse and was just just shoot us straight. And the nurse was like, if you want to see your dad alive, you have to come today. So then I found myself on 3 planes in a rental car, getting there as fast as possible, begging God to allow me to see my dad, And my dad died that night. I did spend 5 hours with him, which was so beautiful. It was sacred, holy ground, But that was so 8 months into the Joy Project, in 4 weeks, lost 3 people that I loved. Very suddenly, and got back to Connecticut, and I just thought, study joy.
Yeah.
Unthinkable.
Right. Yeah. When you think back to your family member who died by suicide and the days following, and you're being present to your family and you're being present to your own grief, what are some of the let me back up and say and frame why I'm asking this question. It seems to me oftentimes that we try to have some sort of, in reflecting upon our experiences, some sort of narrative by which we frame some sort of sensibility or meaninglessness of whatever we're going through. So I guess the reason I'm asking the question is I'm just interested in how, when you look back upon your experience in those days following your family member's suicide, what are kind of some key moments that you look back on of what you experienced in the wake of such a devastating death? Or what are details of your experience that stand out to you?
Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, I've never cried that much in my life for 6 days straight. Like today, I mean, I can cry thinking about it. Even into Christmas, it was like, yeah, no, so it was like 7, 8 days straight. I just every moment was like trying not to cry. It's just all of us, we just cried so much.
And
So
yeah.
it was like a lot of weeping, a lot of, and then this real desire to celebrate who he was,
Yeah.
to honor him in death. That was like, we wanted on that Friday night in that funeral service, that memorial service, we wanted like his life to be more than about like his death.
Yeah.
And I think, and so we worked very, very hard to honor his life and who he was,
Right.
and to bring him to life for people, but also to say, like, everyone knew that was there that he struggled with depression very severely since he was like 14 years old. And he was 30 when he passed away.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like, and it was like very severe depression for for that whole time. It never let up. And I remember, man, I remember that week being very, very upset with God in a way that I had never really been upset with God, where I was like, why did you not allow the darkness to lift? Like, why did the darkness never lift for him? Like, why did it take this for the darkness to lift? And that's the thing. After this happened, I wanted to understand suicidal thinking in a way so that I could help to work against it, in this society. And one of the biggest thing that I learned, the most important thing that I learned, there's two important things. One was that people who die by suicide really are trying to find relief from the pain in their life, from darkness. And they think that this is the only way that it's going to happen, And then the other thing, and I think that's a very important thing, is that we understand that helps us to have compassion for people who die by suicide. Is like, they really were trying to find relief, and they felt like this was like
Right.
the only way, And then the other thing is, Thomas Joyner's book, Why People Die by Suicide, says that there's a trifecta of 3 things that come together that make it possible for someone to take their own life. And one is a sense of profound loneliness, like no one understands me, no one can reach me where I am. Another is a sense of your life has become ineffective, that you're a burden on other people, or your life is meaningless. Some version of that, and then over time, the developed capacity to harm oneself. And so he says these 3 things come together, and we can't really change someone's developed capacity to harm themselves. Oftentimes that comes from an abusive childhood, for example. You can't change that, right?
Yeah.
But we can change whether people feel lonely or they feel like a burden.
Yeah.
And so that's what I wanted to focus on in The Gravity of Joy, is how do we feel less alone?
Right.
And how do we help each other to see that you're not a burden? Like, your life might be full of pain. Like, you may not like yourself. You may have made mistakes. You may have failed. But like, your life is not just ineffective.
Yeah.
You can be redeemed too. Like all, and everything can be redeemed.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to go back to what you said just a moment ago about how you feel like that you're not aware of having been that angry with God before,
Yeah.
or perhaps even spoken to God in that way before. I wonder if one of the failings of Christian formation or theological education might be our insufficiency in teaching lament, which is odd given that half the book of Psalms are laments, right? But I know that you're doing work in religious education, theological education. What are you learning about teaching people to express emotion, teaching people to express anger, express lamentation, express grief.
Absolutely. I think it's so central to Christian faith and to Christian religious education. And this is absolutely something that I'm teaching in my classes, but also encouraging through this book and and then in retreats I lead and conferences I lead and trainings that I do, to say that creating space for befriending emotions, especially difficult ones, but then also, the thing is that we don't create space for like any emotion very well.
Right.
Yep. And so it's so important. We need, it's Fred Rogers who said that feelings have to be mentionable.
Yeah.
That we have to have permission to feel and to feel deeply and openly. And so we have to give people that permission. And one of those things that we need to be able to feel deeply is absolutely lament. And we do have to learn, how do I articulate my laments to God? And for me, like, for example, in one of my classes, I teach how, like, that creating a lament room in a church is actually a really meaningful thing to do, or at a Christian university, probably at any, like at a non-Christian, any university. Right. But to have a room where, especially in, like a church, for example, where people can go into it and express laments in all different ways. I'm imagining where you have index cards and people can just put their laments up on the walls, where you have coloring, you have like colored pencils and markers and whatever, paper, and people can draw their laments and put them somewhere, where people can paint, where there's people can light candles. I think that's the power. A few months ago, I found myself in a Catholic, I'm a Mennonite pastor, but I found myself at a Catholic church. And the Catholic Church really does this right, in the sense of, like, they always have an open sanctuary,
Yeah, right.
And I found myself entering into this dark, beautiful sanctuary where there's all these lit candles and then more that can be lit, kneeling before Mary, like praying. And, that needs to be more, like, there needs to be that space. Like, I think that's what they do. That's a really beautiful thing that the Catholic Church does for people, just creating this space where people can lament, Yeah. Yeah. And so we need the same thing for righteous anger, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that some years ago, I remember starting a therapy season of some therapy, and and I was dealing among a number of things with a great deal of depression. And the therapist said, "What are you feeling?" And I said, I thought for a moment, and then I said, I don't know. And he chuckled and he said, "I think you're telling the truth." But yeah, that capacity to learn to pay attention to what we're feeling and not repress it or suppress it. And then to learn that there are healthier and less healthier ways to express them, right? And to process them.
Yeah. So it's like, how do we constructively feel this thing?
Right.
So it's not, as a thing, there's no such thing from my perspective as a bad emotion.
Yeah.
Like, we feel things and we cannot help how we feel.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, but the question is, can I feel this in a constructive way?
Right, rather
in
than
a way
destructive
that's going
or,
to not, destroy my own self or someone else, dehumanize someone else in the process,
Yeah.
But yeah, I've started a guided meditation about 8 months ago, like right in the middle of COVID, where I was just like, I need this in my life.
Right.
So I started with a guided meditation that every morning, one of the questions that it asks me is, how does your heart feel? And I find many days it's actually hard for me. I'm like, how do I feel today?
Yeah.
Like, paying attention to how you feel, and then, and honoring that, and then saying, like, I think there's wisdom there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, learning also to pay attention, not with all of my emotions, but with some of my emotions, I've learned to detect particular physical or bodily sensations that sometimes go with some of those. So sometimes I can catch the physical sensation and say, oh, I'm in a place of where I may be sliding into some depression because I'm noticing the way that feels on the back of my head.
Yeah.
And so that's been helpful to me to pay attention to.
Yeah, the body keeps the score, right?
Yeah, that's right. Indeed. Your father's passing away from opioid addiction. Give us some kind of pictures of what it was like coming to realize your father's addiction.
I denied it for a really long time. And I mean, not intentionally, but I did notice, basically, my sister had put it so well at the funeral that I just, asked her if I could put it in the book this way. And it was just like, he lived big for so long. My dad was just not only like a big dude, he just had a big stature, but he was like a big presence in a room. Like he walked into a room and she was like, here I am, which probably get a little bit of that from,
Yeah.
And I remember even watching him as a kid. He was an attorney, like watching him do the closing arguments in a courtroom. And it was magic. The guy could captivate an audience, and that's why he won so much, because his closing arguments were on point. It was beautiful. You could hear a pin drop in the courtroom because he was articulate, and he would walk and like pause in all the right places, and you're just, and then I remember post-college just starting to see in him that, like he stopped going to work. He's not working as much. And then realizing in phone calls, wow, he sounds, and I say in the book, he sounds so sleepy. He sounds like he's not able to engage in this conversation. And, and I knew he was taking a lot of pain medication for pain that he said he had, like when he had 2 hip surgeries. But then the thing was like, he didn't want to go to rehab. He didn't want to really learn to walk again well. And then it was just, then every time I went to visit him, it got worse and worse. And over the years, the phone calls got worse and worse. And I remember when he could not remember where I went to school or where I lived in a conversation. He's like, wait, where do you live again? I'm like, I'd lived in Los Angeles for years. I was like, what? Like, why don't you know where I live? And I became angry. And I just thought, why don't you care enough about me to remember these things, And I didn't know what opioids did. I didn't realize how much it impacted your memory. I didn't know also how much he was doing it until a particular time that I described that I went there. And it was like, wow. His house was in disarray. It was awful. It was disgusting. And I was like, this is his life. His whole life is doing pills all day long. That's what he does. He sits in a bedroom by himself and is just but that anybody you talk to who has become addicted to opioids say that it's almost like being in a womb. Like it just creates this like very safe, warm, cozy feeling. And so you just, other drugs you want to do with other people, from what I understand. Like Andrew Sullivan talks about this in a really important article that he wrote, I think for the New Yorker, but he says like, that the drugs of your time say a lot about kind of the moment of the culture, which I thought was so fascinating in this piece. And he's like, there are other drugs like cocaine, like that people want to do with other people. And it makes you want to be around other people. You want to like go party with other people. You want to work really hard. You want to do this or that. No. Opioids make you want to retreat and to be alone, but they make you happy. But that's the thing. They make you happy with no one else. They make you feel safe with no one else. Like and so, yeah, I watched him go from being the guy who lived really big to the guy who lived so small. And he forgot my birthday, didn't come to my wedding reception. Just then that's when I really realized like this thing has overtaken his life to, and especially that the very last time that I saw him, he had lost so much weight and it was awful, awful.
Didn't come to your wedding reception?
Mm-mm. No, I had one, he couldn't come I got married in San Diego and he couldn't come and I knew he wouldn't be able to come because of his, because but he was in a wheelchair, but it wasn't just that. I knew, like, he barely leaves his house ever. So, like, he's not going to be able to get on a plane. He's just not in the shape to be able to, he had to have a lot of help to even get to a car. So, but it was important to me that I get to experience this with him, So I created a wedding reception. I had my aunt have it at her house in Kentucky just for him to be able to be there. Literally, not nobody else. It was literally just for him. And that morning I called him and he said he couldn't come.
You left New Haven from Yale, made your way, and you got to be with your dad prior to his death.
Right, yeah.
What sorts of what does that time mean to you that you got to be with him?
Yeah. I'm so grateful that, first of all, that my dear friend Phil Love, who's in hospice right now, actually, the former manager of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture, is in hospice. But I called him that morning and I asked him, should I go? Basically, I don't know. He was my boss, other than Miroslav, but he ran the center. So I'm just like, well, I've been gone a lot the last couple weeks. And I said, should I go? And he was like, yes, get on a plane right now. Right now, go. Just get off the phone with me and go. And I'm so eternally grateful to him for that. And when I walked into that hospital room, the Angela, who has always loved David Williams, just was very there. And it was everything that had been happening, everything that he had forgotten, every moment that he'd really hurt me. In that moment, I was in those hours, it was just but I put aside, and I was just able to tell him, I love you, and and I'm going to miss you terribly, and I'm so grateful for you. And it was almost as if it was a futuristic understanding of addiction that I was going to learn later. Because similar to suicidal thinking, I think we can think a lot of things about people who die by suicide that are unfair and that are confused. Same thing with addiction. I used to think that it was a moral failure. I thought it was so I thought that, and now I know that it's a health crisis. And I think if we can think about it as a health crisis and not a moral failure, it helps us to have more compassion for those in our lives that experience addiction. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think of it myself as a health crisis, and I think of it in watching family members, friends, being close to recovery communities, in recovery communities. I do think of it as, I think the disease model, whether we take that as a metaphor or we take it explicitly, it's certainly some sort of chronic dysfunction, right, that people can't control. I wonder sometimes too, though, if one of the reasons it's so easy to reduce it to a moral failure is because of the ways in which the manifestations of the disease feel so much like personal hurts. For you just described, that your father didn't show up after he said he would at your wedding reception that you had planned for him, or
forgetting my birthday.
Forgetting your birthday, right? Or, people that we love lying to us, or taking things from us that are not theirs to take. And yet, there's all this reams of research about the ways in which, if we reduce it to a moral failure, we're not seeing clearly what's going on, right?
Right, yeah. And also, I think I'm arguing in the gravity of joy. I think we write things and then we're like, I'm trying to say this. I think I'm saying it's a health crisis, plus at the root of that health crisis is this crisis of despair that I think stems from cultural issues, where we have a problem we have malformed visions of the good life in American culture. We have there's a lot of issues with how I think there are many cultural things right now that are contributing to identity crises, which are really very intricately tied to both addiction and suicide.
Yeah, so you say that our culture is obsessed with synthetic happiness and yet riddled with pain, which I take that as kind of a double entendre there of synthetic, in the sense that we're metaphorically seeking a synthetic happiness and yet sometimes literally seeking synthetic happiness in the synthetic pill, right? In the synthetic drug.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we think that happiness is the good life.
Yeah. Yeah. And talking about the health crisis, you cite some statistics at one point. The rates of opioid prescriptions since the 1990s are mind-boggling. In 2017, for example, doctors in Kentucky, where your father lived, prescribed at a rate of 86.8 prescriptions for every 100 people, which is mind-boggling. One of the highest prescription rates in the country. In Alabama, my home state, which had the highest rate, doctors wrote 107.2 prescriptions per 100 people. And the sort of sense of brokenness in that, in the wake of destruction, is mind-boggling.
Yeah. Yeah, you feel that. You read that statistic and you feel it in your bones. I read that statistic, and there was moments while I was writing this book, while I was doing research, looking for stories or this or that, where I actually had to leave my office at Yale and go take a walk, because you can't read that and then just go on with your day. You can't read this story or that, right?
Right.
You feel it, and especially as Christians, there's no way, right? Otherwise, we're the people who walk by the Good Samaritan. We don't want to be those people,
Yeah. I will say that I was pleased to see that when you go back home to Kentucky, you love Hardee's biscuits and gravy.
Oh my gosh, I know, it's so silly, but
that's one of my favorite childhood memories, is stopping at the Hardee's in Talladega and getting biscuits and gravy.
I mean, I don't know how you would not think that a fast food restaurant could make that good of gravy, but those biscuits are so flaky and stuff. I know, I can't.
And the country ham, they have
kryptonite.
Excellent. Yes. So you go on in your book to say that one of the things that began to help you move through or process this heavy grief you're in was a prison Bible study.
Yeah.
And how so?
Goodness. I say at the end of chapter 4 of the book that I sought help in numerous ways for, my grief. I woke up every day for a year and a half just in the fog of grief. And I did wonder, how will I ever recover from this? It was, I was incredibly sad all the time. And so I sought help in all kinds of ways. And I did do some EMDR therapy, which was helpful for me. I think that's important for people to know. And I did do journaling, and I tried journaling. I tried, walks around the city and blah, 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 like yoga and stuff. But then I signed up randomly to be a co-leader of a Bible study at a prison, a maximum security prison with women. And I had been thinking for a few years about mass incarceration. I'd read some books on it, and I was really feeling that sort of tug in my own spirit, by the Spirit of God, I think, to respond to mass incarceration in some sort of some sort of very concrete way, do something about this. And so I'd just been feeling like maybe I would end up doing some ministry related to prison. I didn't know how it was all going to happen. But so I decided during the saddest time of my life to become a co-leader of a Bible study. And of course, the quintessential beautiful things that the things that God does all the time, I think I'm going to go and minister to these women, and I'm the one that's ministered to. And that's why I dedicate the book, to Dustin and Mason and my dad, but I also dedicate the book to the women in prison, because it's such a beautiful juxtaposition. I mean, it's the the yin and the yang almost, these women who redeemed all of this who helped me to get on the road to healing. And But I say in the dedication, may the joy that you brought me be yours too.
So you, at one point, began to kind of describe ways in which we might become open to joy or open to receive joy or posture ourselves for joy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, what sorts of practices did you begin to see in the context of the prison
Mm-hmm.
that have become for you pictures of practices that allow this sort of posture to being open to joy?
Yeah. I often, when I talk about this, I talk about them as gateways to joy. Because like you said at the beginning, I say we can't manufacture joy. We can't make it like we make spaghetti. But we can be ready for it and we can look for it.
Yeah.
Joy is, from my perspective, the feeling, the recognition and the connection. It's the feeling of the recognition and connection we feel as to what is meaningful, truthful, beautiful, good. Oftentimes our connection with other people. So a gateway to joy is gratitude. And a lot of people, I think Bob Emmons has done a really good job as a scholar trying to help people to understand the power of gratitude in our lives. His books are really wonderful on this topic. It was in being in that Bible study with women that I really saw this enacted, where the more that we would give them space to actually talk about, like, is there something to be thankful for? Can you look back at this last week and find something, some way that God met you, some way that someone helped you, some way you helped someone else? Like, what are you grateful for?
Mm-hmm.
What can we be grateful for, even in this room? And they always could find things to be grateful for. And as they shared, you could see it was sort of an infectious thing that happened where it was a contagion, like where people are sharing with each other. Oh yeah, that reminds me, this person did this for me, and this happened. And then and when we meditate on things that are good in our lives, when we meditate on the truth, when we focus on that, like, it opens ourselves up to that warm, beautiful feeling that joy is. Another, I think, gateway to joy is absolutely faithful presence with other people.
Yeah.
There is something when we are faithfully present to each other, and I am not someone who's like, get rid of all technology or anything like that. Obviously, like, I wrote a book like about the new media landscape and ways to navigate it that are constructive. But part of it is, there is something about when I was in that room with people and there's no cell phones, we can't bring them into the prison. Yeah. There was something about sitting in a circle, and I think I talk about Nina's counsel circles that she runs. There's something about sitting with people, faithfully present, listening to one another from the heart, sharing stories, sharing gratitude, sharing lament, that there is a power in that is like that, the effect of which is joy.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a sobering joy.
Right.
But, so that's another gateway to joy. Absolutely. And then I think, that creating spaces of joy where we're like with expectation, hope is a gateway to joy. Jürgen Moltmann, the great theologian, says that hope is the anticipation of joy. So actually being able to write out our hopes, name our hopes, declare our hopes, I think is a way of posturing ourselves for joy.
Yeah. The related to that, you have this beautiful picture in the chapter on when you first start going to the prison about singing.
Yeah.
And being together, and a story about them all singing "This Little Light of Mine," and gathering as a sort of seed, perhaps, of joy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Gathering is a gateway to joy. I think music is a gateway to joy.
Yeah.
I think we see that a lot, in the sort of similar to sports, it's like that collective joy that can happen in a space. But yeah, absolutely. These women, well, and especially when we give ourselves over to a moment to one another, that's what music, I think, really allows us to do, that probably creates this, room for joy in our lives, is because when we would, in that room, there was no shame. Shame will keep a lot of us from joy. Like I talk about obstacles to joy too. Shame is one of them.
Yeah.
And in that room though, and it wasn't me that like produced it. It was these women. Somehow they began, it was like we just had particular leaders in the group where this was a place where you could be fully yourself. You know, I say in chapter 5, like nothing was half-baked in prison. That's why I felt so alive there. It was, you could tell the truth in that room. And not just the bad truth, you know, but you told the truth, like, I see you. Like, this is who you are.
Yeah.
This is who you can become. This is, God loves you. This is how you're seen. You know, like we told the truth to each other. And when you tell the truth to one another, and not in that sort of like really messed up way we often talk about truth telling, which is like, you tell hard things in love with people. Like, no, in that room, we celebrated, we affirmed what was good about one another. And that creates room for joy. And that takes away shame. And the more we told the truth to one another, the more we were faithfully present, the more we came to that space and gave each other permission to feel whatever we were feeling. And then we entered into music with one another. Yeah, the more room for joy we had.
Yeah. Storytelling plays a crucial element throughout your book, but it seems clear to me, it's not merely a rhetorical device for you in your book, but instead storytelling becomes itself one of these practices or one of these gateways, perhaps, to being with. So describe that for us. How do you see that working?
Yeah, the medium is the message. You know, I think that's what I'm trying. I think all along the way in the book, I'm trying to do precisely to demonstrate what I'm inviting all of us to do. When we have a sense of where we have been and where we're headed, we have a sense of who we are. When we believe that we have a story to tell, that we're living into a story, most especially when we realize that story is larger than ourselves, and that my story is not finished yet. That's how joy becomes an act of resistance against despair. And when you realize, oh my goodness, I'm a part of something larger than myself. My story is not finished. I have somewhere that I'm going. And also I have community. I'm part of a community that has endured suffering, that has made it through, as Dr. Wemberly and Dr. Wright. I quote them in chapter 8 of the book. I talk about the power of cultural memory, of passing on stories of people making it through suffering. That's their beautiful research that I'm noting there. When we realize I'm a part of a community that has overcome, that has endured, that has found God in the midst of, there's power in that too, right? And so there's this sense of like, there's a larger story and mine's not finished yet, and I have somewhere I'm going, and I have a community of people that I'm living out this story with. That helps to us to see the meaning and truth and beauty and goodness in our lives. Yeah, that's why it's so important.
And it points to, again, the ways in which shame can not only be inhibiting oneself, but it can be inhibiting the flourishing of a community, because it can keep us from telling stories about hardships we've been through and the ways we've learned to move through them, right?
Yeah, we have, and especially shame around failure and mistakes.
Right.
You know, but if we can learn to talk through those things, to tell the stories of, this is the mistake that I made. I mean, I think that was my dad, a huge problem in his life, was that he had so much regret and so much shame about particular things that had happened. And he never felt like he could actually tell the stories to, you know, he never like found that community and really tried to work through those things. Yeah.
I've been sitting here wondering whether to tell this, but I told you before we started that my great-grandfather killed himself. As I know, what the details I know of the story was that he had made it through the Depression. He owned a general store in Alabama, and then his store burned down from a fire, and he lost everything still. And then he died by suicide. And this happened when my grandmother was in her first year of her marriage. And I don't recollect our family having talked about that until I was like in my early 20s. Maybe we did, but that's my earliest recollection of that. But when I was young married, and my grandmother was 94, 95, and I thought I've never talked with my grandmother about her father's suicide, but I want to talk to her about it before she dies. And so I was with her alone one day back in Alabama, and so I asked her to tell me the story, and she did, and she was very open about it. But the thing that broke my heart was she talked about the why. You know, everybody asks the why questions after suicide, and was I not enough to live for, and so forth. And then I asked her, I said, do you still think about it? And she said, she either said every day or all the time.
Yeah.
And she's like 94 years old, and she had never talked about it with me before, but she's thinking about it every day or all the time. And for whatever reason, her inability to talk about it or to find a safe place to talk about it or just, and I had asked her, I said, did you and grandfather, because we had also talked about her loss of a child at childbirth. And I said, did you and Granny ever talk about this stuff? And she said, there's some things that are just too hard to talk about. And so it's that sort of not finding a way to move into that place of vulnerability or out of the shame or whatever it is, to find a place where you can talk about the stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think it's beautiful that you found a place to talk about the stuff that you've been through and facilitated other people having spaces to talk about these things. And the possibilities of the gateways to joy, or facilitating a posture that's open to receive joy is a beautiful thing.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, we've been talking with Angela Williams Gorrell, Assistant Professor of Practical Theology at Baylor University, on her new book, The Gravity of Joy, A Story of Being Lost and Found. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed our episode with TED Talks Daily podcast host Elise Hu on her experience in a beauty-centric Korean culture, then you should check out the podcast 10,000 Things, produced by our friends at KUOW. On the brand new season of 10,000 Things, poet and museologist Shin Yi Pai explores the stories of strong, trailblazing Asian American women, from a former MMA cage fighter to a professional flautist and a Seattle pastry chef. Hear their vibrant, diverse, and bittersweet stories and the cultural artifacts that are interwoven into them, including a slice of ube, cheesecake, and a loquat tree. So go ahead, listen to 10,000 Things on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carrie Harmon, Jason Sheasley, Ellis Osborne, and Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.